Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you joining us here today. A warm welcome to the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action global event, From Guide to Action, strengthening the role of finance ministries in driving climate action. I'm Nick Godfrey. I'm a senior advisor at the Grantham Research Institute on climate change and the environment at the London School of Economics. I will be your host and MC for today. Before we get started with the main event, here is a brief overview of the agenda. Finance in Indonesia. We will have part A on strengthening the role of finance ministers in driving climate action. This will cover an introduction and overview of the flagship guide released by the Coalition to the public today, covered by Pekka Moran and Lord Nicholas Stern. Part B will feature a high-level ministerial panel on the role of finance ministries with leading country examples chaired by Jay Shumba. Part C focus on from words to action and how the Coalition and its partners can support members to implement the guide, chairs by Rallian Beckers. We will then have an audience Q&A before ending with closing remarks from Rallian. Please note that you can use the audience Q&A feature and ask questions throughout the event. You can also upvote questions. These questions will then be addressed by speakers at the end. The event will be recorded and a recording of the event will be made available afterwards. The flagship guide to action can be found on the Coalition's website alongside a summary in 5 additional languages. The Twitter hashtag for the event is #GuideToAction. I'd ask and remind all speakers to keep to time, and without further ado, Masita will now kick us off.
Thank you, Nick. Greetings, action titled The Guide to Action, Enhancing the Influence of Finance Ministries in Advancing Climate Initiative, which has meticulously crafted by the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action. Today, we take immense pride in presenting an exceptional roster of prominent finance ministers and also distinguished experts. The collective expertise and prominence of our guests promise an enriching experience for everyone in attendance. I can personally guarantee that participation in this event will leave with a greater knowledge than they had before. Prior to our expert comprehensive presentation on the report's findings and high-level expert discussion, allow me to provide a brief overview of the Coalition and also the report itself. The Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action initially arose as a symbol of unity and also mutual cooperation among finance ministers around the globe. We comprise of 88 prominent finance ministries now and also supported by 26 esteemed institutional partners. This coalition has represented a remarkable collaboration of influential fiscal and economic policymakers. Together, we account around 40% of global CO2 emission and also around 70% of global GDP, making our potential collective impact is very significant at the global stage. The coalition has successfully united under the shared understanding that we can no longer afford to relegate environmental policy to the sideline. Recognizing the pivotal role of finance ministries, we have embraced the notion that finance ministries possess the essential tool to unlock and drive climate action. In this respect, finance ministers can help yield a double dividend by helping developing countries reaching their own Paris Agreement goals, while also accelerating developmental goals. The objective can be to create well-paid green jobs, lift millions out of poverty and extreme poverty, implement green infrastructure projects, create social safety net for a socially just transition, and also to leverage the power of private finance. In practical terms, the primary function of the Coalition of Finance Ministers is to serve as an exceptional platform where finance ministers from diverse countries can come together irrespective of their economic standing or geographical location. You will see that today's event that features Ministry of Finance representatives from nearly every corner of the world is a symbol of the represented diversity within the coalition itself. The main objective of the coalition is to foster a spirit of dialogue and joint action among finance leaders by acknowledging the interdependence of our economies in an ever more interconnected world. By transcending boundaries and also engaging in open conversation, these ministers strive to tackle common challenge, devise innovative solutions, and also to foster economic stability and growth. All members of the coalition have committed to the 6 Helsinki Principle, which advocate for national action on climate change, particularly through fiscal and financial policies. Each principle is associated with a specific working group comprised of the coalition's members, countries, and also institutional partners. This event and also the guide will be presented today is the product derived from the Helsinki Principle 2, which emphasize the exchange of knowledge and expertise through peer-to-peer interaction, aiming to assist coalition members in enhancing their capacity and roles in policymaking. We express our gratitude to Lord Stern and also GRI for being the institutional partner in supporting this initiative, which has been led by Finland and also Rwanda. I will now pass the floor to them to provide insights on the guidebook, share best practices, and offer policy recommendations. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you very much, Masita. So now, without further ado, we'll move to part A on strengthening the role of finance ministers in driving climate action. Pekka Moran, Special Representative for the Minister of Finance for Finland, and Lord Nicholas Stern, Chair of the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the Environment at London School of Economics and Political Science, will now give an overview and introduction to the Guide to Action. Pekka.
Thank you very much, Rashida. Thank you very much, Nick. My name is Pekka Moran. I've been co-leading this work with Thierry Watran, my friend and colleague from Rwanda. Many have asked what the coalition has achieved the first 4 years of its work and what's the value at it. Pretty much this report is a reflection and answer to that question. Before moving to the guide itself, let me just give some backgrounds on the work itself. So how did we prepare this report? We engaged more than 100 experts from different institutions, and of those, 30 finance ministries were actively engaged. We had a technical advisory group, institutional partners such as World Bank, IMF, and others were utilized. So a lot of expertise. Grantham Research Institute has been acting as the key lead institutional partner providing technical support. So thank you for all those involved. The 140 country cases reflect and demonstrate the progress that has been made, that also encourages countries to move forward. Many ministers have requested and asked for these country cases to demonstrate that the reforms can be taken and they are being taken place. But why did we produce this report? 3 reasons. First, to help finance ministries to understand what it takes to mainstream climate into economic, fiscal, and financial policies. Many finance ministries have very good expertise on specific issues, like, for example, taxation in my country, but comprehensive approaches are not there yet. They are being developed. Secondly, to help key stakeholders, particularly those who are in charge of climate policies, and that's not normally finance ministries, to understand where finance ministries can help, but also to ensure that they have mandates, they have resources, know-how, and they can really be part of the climate governance structures in the countries, but also internationally. And thirdly, to ensure that climate objectives can be met in the first place. This is important because we need to be able to take into account economic realities, fiscal, economic, financial aspects, and understand the impacts of climate change and the impact of the actions and trade-offs involved. The coalition will support these activities. The co-chairs are going to, in the end, elaborate a bit more on the next steps. But let me just say that already now we have initiated a workshop events that support countries bilaterally or multilaterally. So any stakeholders, interested parties, policymakers that are relevant, we are happy to do so. And these roadshows are ongoing. So with that, I would just like to pass it on to Nick Stern to present the framework guide itself. Thank you, Nick, for your support, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pekka, and welcome to my study in a very hot London. But you will notice that my generation still has books, the younger generation does not. The starting point for all this is not easy. We're still recovering from COVID. We have a war with its implications for energy, food, debt, prices. In many countries, we have cost of living crises, and we have stuttering growth in the world economy. I think we all know that the answer to that set of challenges must be investment, and it must be investment that tackles perhaps the biggest challenge of all, which is the threat of climate change. So it will be an investment story, and it will take us out, we hope, from a situation which has multiple problems, multiple crises. That investment will not be easy, and the key purpose of this guide is action to realize that kind of investment. We should also recognize that as we do this, as we follow this story, which we must from the point of view of protecting our future and reviving the world economy, we actually will create a new form of growth, which is much better than the dirty, destructive models of the past. It will be investment in the clean, which is in many ways, in many parts of the economy, already cheaper than the dirty. It'll be investment in those areas which are seeing the fastest innovation and research and development. It will be in large measure about resource efficiency. Efficiency is productivity, is growth, particularly, of course, energy efficiency. It will be a much healthier society. We kill 5 or 10 million people a year from air pollution, and we maim many more. The health outcome, of course, is of fundamental importance in its own right, but it also enables faster growth. A healthier population is more productive. We can have cities where we can move and breathe. We can have ecosystems which are robust and fruitful. And of course, the investment itself, and I'll turn to the quantity in just a moment, will be a major driver of growth. So this is not only essential, this increased investment to tackle our problems, particularly the problems of climate, it is also a very attractive new growth story. And in large measure, we can recognize the geographies, the sectors, the technologies where that investment needs to take place. Of course, it has to be right across all countries of the world. So that's clearly then a statement of a problem and a response where finance ministers have to be absolutely central. It's growth, it's productivity, it's economy wide, it's stability, and so on. So it's fundamental for the finance ministers, and it's tremendous that we now have 88. I remember a small table and a small room in Madrid in COP25 in November 2020. If you look now at the 88 members we have, and it'll be into the 90s before too long. It's a tremendous achievement, and I wanted to salute the leadership of Finland, Indonesia, and now the Netherlands, and particularly Pekka, Masita and Ralim in taking all this forward. It's a tremendous achievement, and your leadership has been fundamental. So let me turn to the guide itself. We begin, of course, by recognizing what we have to do, which I've tried to lay out in summary form. And we also recognize that finance ministries control around or manage the expenditure of around a third of global GDP in a direct way. That, of course, is enormously important responsibility, but also enormously important from the point of view of their influence. So the guide itself sets out in a structured, systematic, experienced way and data evidence-based way how to unlock the investment. We're talking about in richer economies, an extra 2 or 3 percentage points of GDP. And in many emerging markets and developing economies, 4 or 5 percentage points of GDP. In large measure, we have a world with excess savings. That should be possible from the point of view of world macro. And it should be possible actually from the point of view of history. If you look back and see that not so long ago, investment rates as a percentage of GDP were indeed a good deal higher than now. But that does not mean it's easy. There are a lot of difficult problems to solve, and that's the purpose of this report. And the finance ministry will be the one that drives the action across the whole economy. It's difficult, but there are already many very powerful examples, and this report sets them out in a really strong way. Examples from Rwanda in financing their nationally determined contributions. Examples from Jamaica in terms of disaster risk management. Examples from Uruguay and now how rapidly they've gone to 100% renewables, and thus have been much more robust to the world energy crisis. One or two different places. But having said that, let's recognize that actually rather few ministries of finance have a climate strategy now, but we do hope that this guide will help in creating that. Now, could I have for the last part, I want to say the slide that sets this out. This is in a sense the summary slide which describes what finance ministers can do. The three functions: economic strategy, fiscal, financing. Economic strategy is something that sets out the framework for the next 10, 20 years across the economy in terms of national priorities, infrastructure strategies, and so on. That is crucial for the investors, public or private, to have the confidence to make those investment plans and carry them through. The second is fiscal policy. That's both sides of the budget, the tax pricing side, and of course the budgetary allocation sides. There will need to be, for example, in many countries, carbon pricing, some support for R&D, but also support for the building of the grids and so on. You can see both on the tax and expenditure sides of the budget that fiscal policy will be central. Finance, of course, has to be there, the right kind of finance, the right place, the right time to help manage risk, to share risk, to reduce risk. And it will be domestic finance, of course, primarily. Investment is mainly financed domestically in most countries of the world, but there will also be international financial flows, which will be very important, and public and private will be of fundamental importance. The majority of the investment will be private, but a good bit will be public. Similarly, the majority of the investment would be privately financed, but also significant amount public. In order to make all these things happen, you're going to need strong leadership. The finance minister and the prime minister or president have to work together to set the priorities and make sure that the economy is focused, and particularly government ministries are focused in the right place. As well as the leadership, there has to be collaboration across ministries, collaboration public and private sectors, collaboration domestic and international. And to make all this happen, you've got to have the right people with the right kind of training. Now, finance ministries are, of course, ministries like others under pressure on their staff, but they're also, on average, rather skilled places. But that doesn't mean they have the right kind of skills to respond in the right time frame to these kind of problems. And that's why it's so important here to have that in place. Right across this, of course, public support must be there, and this must be seen as a just transition where everybody has a chance. So thank you again for all of you, and it means actually all of the finance ministries which contributed so much to creating this report. Thank you to Nick Godfrey and Annika Heckwell from my own institution, the Grantham Institution, for putting so much work into all this. Thank you again, Pekka Mashita and Raylene and your countries for their leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick, for that presentation, and to Pekka. Without further ado, we're going to move now to part B. We're going to have a high-level ministerial panel. We're going to hear inspiring examples of leadership. I'm going to now turn over to Jay Shombo, who is the Undersecretary for International Affairs at the US Treasury, who will make some introductory remarks and introduce the ministerial panel. Over to you, Jay.
Great. Thanks very much, Nick. So I first want to just introduce the terrific panel that we have with us today. So we have Janet Yellen, Secretary of the Treasury for the United States. We have Azucena Aberleche, the Minister of Economy and Finance for Uruguay. We have Morten Budskap, the Acting Minister of Finance for Denmark, and Thierry Watrin, the Green Economy and Climate Change Advisor at the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning of Rwanda. So before we launch into the discussion today, we wanted to take just a minute to think about the challenge that's bringing us all together here. So the recent IPCC reports confirm that the window of opportunity to leave a planet worthy to our children and grandchildren is coming closer to closing. And this is climate change is clearly an existential threat to the planet, and it's an emerging threat to our economies and financial system that we're in many ways all responsible for trying to maintain. And at the same time, the transition to a net zero economy presents a terrific opportunity for firms, for industries, and for countries that try to really make that transition and lead that transition. And I really think this guide is an important step to understand how we can increase efforts at ministries of finance to lead that climate action. And so I hope over the next half hour, we can hear a lot more about what different ministries are doing. So with that, let me kick off the panel. And so my first question is for my boss. Secretary Yellen, why are finance ministries so important for driving climate action? And can you give us some insight into what you have done at Treasury to support this agenda, including how you're connecting climate action to Treasury's core functions?
Thanks so much, Jay, and it's great to be here with all of you. I want to thank our coalition partners for their collaboration with us, including on this incredibly useful guide. I'm also grateful to my longtime friend, Lord Nicholas Stern, and the Grantham Institute for their work. 25 years ago, I delivered my first speech warning about the dangers of climate change. In the years since then, we have seen extreme weather events accelerate with alarming severity and frequency. Droughts, floods, hurricanes, and other climate-related events have had devastating impacts on lives and livelihoods. Beyond the chronic impacts of climate change, acute weather-related supply shocks can destabilize regional economies. That's why Treasury and the Biden administration are pursuing important policies to mitigate and adapt to climate change. Examples include our Inflation Reduction Act, clean energy investments, which will have positive spillovers across the world. They also include our just energy transition partnerships in our partner countries, along with our initiative to evolve the multilateral development banks to better address global challenges like the climate crisis. We're also considering ways to encourage private sector delivery of net zero commitments and activities. But these policies are not self-executing. And today I want to focus on, not on policy, but on something more personal to all of us, namely my own experience running a finance ministry and how I've evolved our institutional structure to deliver on our shared climate goals. And there are three pillars of our work to highlight. First, building the capabilities and capacity to act. From my first day in office, our climate work has been a top priority. We reflected this urgency in a number of foundational documents, from Treasury's strategic plan to a climate action plan that we released about 6 months after I entered office. These plans laid out a comprehensive set of objectives for Treasury over the coming years, along with top to bottom actions that we would take to meet them. We also built the capacity to take on these additional responsibilities. We established a climate hub in the department with a climate counselor who reports directly to me. This hub is in charge of coordinating climate policy across all department offices. We also bolstered expert staff working on climate across our domestic and international affairs offices. We created a new leadership position on our economic analysis team dedicated to climate issues. And we established a new office to implement the landmark clean energy investments under the Inflation Reduction Act. We also urged our offices to improve the data and tools that they use to assess climate risks. For example, our Federal Insurance Office has proposed a data collection from certain property and casualty insurers. This proposed collection would help Treasury assess the potential for major disruptions of private insurance coverage in regions that are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Second, we're creating the infrastructure to work with others. The US Treasury has significant authorities to implement climate policies, but we cannot go it alone. Meaningful climate action requires drawing on the best expertise. And at Treasury, that means economists working with scientists and engineers, as well as tax lawyers and other experts. New processes and structures like advisory committees have helped us collaborate with others in our own government, as well as the private sector and other stakeholders. And of course, we've redoubled our work internationally and infused climate into all of our bilateral and multilateral engagements. And this includes joining important groups like this very coalition, where we've benefited from best practices and lessons learned from all of you. Third, we must never forget that in addition to our responsibilities as finance ministers, we're also chief executives of large organizations. I lead around 100,000 dedicated public servants at Treasury and its bureaus. We have an opportunity to serve as a model for the rest of the nation and meet our respective government net zero commitments. And this means we have to walk the walk. Treasury is reducing greenhouse gas emissions throughout our operations and transitioning our fleet to electric vehicles. We all have a role to play in the climate transition. All across the world, we're seeing finance ministries take important institutional steps just like these. Every country confronts a unique set of circumstances, but we all share a common purpose to mobilize action toward a net zero world. The Coalition's guide is essential reading as each of us takes these significant strides. And I look forward to working with you on this and so much more. Thanks, Jay.
Great. Thanks very much, Secretary Yellen. I want to turn now to Minister Aberleche. Can you share with us lessons learned from your ministry's efforts to strengthen its role in driving climate action in Uruguay?
Good morning or good afternoon to all of you. It is an honor for me to be participating in this global event with such outstanding speakers and discussing about such a relevant subject as it is the role of Ministries of Finance in moving forward climate action. First of all, I would like to thank the Coalition Secretariat and the Grantham Institute for the organization of this event and for the work you are doing. You have our unstinting support. I will focus my intervention today and try to answer the question I was just given with a very concrete example on how we are connecting climate action with the core priorities of our ministry in Uruguay. Specifically on the innovative way in which we have aligned our sovereign financing strategy and Uruguay's environmental commitments and the Paris Agreement. As some of you may know, in October of last year, Uruguay issued a sustainability-linked bond, marking our entry into the world of sovereign sustainable finance. This bond directly links Uruguay's financing strategy and cost of capital to the achievement of climate and nature-based goals committed in our first NDC. This bond embeds two key performance indicators. First, reducing the intensity of greenhouse gas emissions in the economy, and second, preserving the area of native forests in the country. Together, they address two complementary environmental global public goods, mitigating global warming and preserving key carbon sinks. Our goals and deadlines are demanding and actionably ambitious. Let me highlight 4 facts about this experience that also emphasizes the pivotal role played by the Ministry of Finance. First, accountability. The bond signals and reasserts the country's commitments and action plan to deliver on an ambitious climate change and sustainability agenda. It shows the country's and the ministry's political decision to turn the country's NDC goals into financially binding commitments. The fact that you have an economic consequence to a target you have set will incentivize countries to make the targets a strategic priority. Second, transparency and higher reporting frequencies. The bond provides investors and the international community with enhanced transparency and accountability on Uruguay's progress towards its environmental goals and conservation of natural capital. In particular, we work to accelerate the reporting of the country's greenhouse gas emissions inventory to annual frequency, elevating Uruguay's reporting practices to be in line with developed countries. Bringing climate data on par with macroeconomic statistics is key for timely reporting and transparent disclosure. Third, drive for innovation. This sovereign bond featured a novel two-way coupon structure. It will reward Uruguay with a lower interest rate if it outperforms on its environmental targets. That is a coupon step down, and will compensate investors if Uruguay fails its environmental commitments. This is a coupon step up. Embedding better aligned financial incentive in sovereign debt instruments can provide positive incentives for countries to contribute to global public goods. Fourth, the importance of interministerial work. In order to design the structure of this bond, and because greenhouse gas emissions and native forest protection spans across all sectors of Uruguayan economy, the Ministry of Finance worked closely with 4 other different ministries: the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Energy and Industry, Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock Production, and Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This coordination was essential to create this governance structure required by the bond. This interministerial coordination helped promote sustainability within the country. The bond is having a galvanizing effect within the public sector and served as an important impetus for much greater collaboration in climate action. My sense is that it will facilitate continuity of the policies and commitments past the current administration. It's been a very enriching process. Let me share that with you. Very enriching the process across the whole public sector, and that's something that will have an effect for the years to come. To conclude, beyond the case of Uruguay, we are convinced that Ministry of Finance can harness financial markets to encourage climate performance and protection of natural capital by creating the right financial incentives. Potential reductions in borrowing cost could potentially provide powerful incentives for governments to follow through on their pledges and tackle the global challenges of climate change and natural capital conservation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister. I'd like to now turn to Acting Minister Butskov. Can you provide some insight for us into whether ministry's mandates and responsibilities are sufficiently defined to let them successfully drive climate action? And can you share with us some examples of leadership from your ministry on this agenda?
Yes, thank you very much, and good afternoon from Copenhagen. And dear co-chairs and members of the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action, dear colleagues, and also, of course, dear Nick, I want to congratulate you on the release of the guide. It is a milestone for the coalition that shows concrete evidence on how Minister of Finance are taking actions across the world. As a small country, Denmark's best chance to contributing in the fight against climate change is to lead by example. to inspire and show others that the green transition actually can be done. That is why I'm particularly happy that the guide highlights the efforts of the Danish Finance Ministry. Denmark has set an ambitious target for reducing 70% of the greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And we want to meet the target in a way that is both socially and balanced while maintaining a strong, competitive and prosperous society. So let me be clear that this is not an easy task. It requires a major transformation of our society, but also our economy, and we still have a long way to go. This is why Mr. Nicolai Wammen set out a vision to take the Danish Minister of Finance to make the Danish Finance Minister as a green engine in society when he took office as Minister of Finance 4 years ago. He was clear that the transition would only succeed if finance ministers took on a leading role and placed climate change in the core of our economic policy. Nicolai is currently on parental leave, taking care of his new young son. He has then asked me to stand in his stead here as an acting Minister of Finance, and he sends you, of course, his best regards. Today, I would like to highlight the steps taken by the Minister of Finance to turn his vision into action. This first step is setting clear political direction. Climate is now a key part of the mission statement of the Minister of Finance, along with traditional economic and financial objectives. This provides a mandate for the entire organization to integrate climate issues into the ministry's core tasks and functions. The second step is building capacity. The ministry has established a dedicated center for green policies with additional staff of analytical capacity. This has allowed us to take on a stronger role in policy development and also in coordination of it. The third step is getting the right tools for the job. Macroeconomic models are at the heart of what enables finance ministers to keep track of economic performance and ensure fiscal sustainability. We want to take on a similar role when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. That's why we are pioneering efforts to integrate climate into macroeconomic modeling with the green reform model. The objective is to get consistent assessments of the economic and climate impact of policy choices. The fourth step is policy coordination, meeting ambitious climate targets in a way that is economically and socially sustainable requires a mix of public investments, regulations, and economic investments across all sectors of the economy. That's why the Minister of Finance has taken on a key role in preparing and coordinating government policies on major cross-cutting agendas. The fifth step is delivering results, of course. We have adopted a number of ambitious climate-related agreements on the future of energy, industry, transport, and also on agriculture. Last year, we succeeded in getting a broad political agreement on a green tax reform with a higher and a more uniform price on emissions. Strong coordination between the Ministry of Finance and other governmental departments was a key in this effort. I hope that our examples can provide inspirations, of course, to others. And at the same time, I'm grateful for the many examples from other coalition members. We'll study these closely and learn from your experiences. It is great news that so many of us are taking the necessary steps. So I think there's only one way, that's to keep up the pace. Let me end here by thanking the co-chairs for their leadership, as well as Nick Stern and the LRC team for their work on the guide. And from both Mr. Wyman and myself, of course, a special thanks to Secretary Yellen and the US team for the close collaboration as co-lead on the coalition's work on integrating climate change into economic and fiscal policy instruments. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you so much for sharing those experiences. I'd like next to welcome Thierry Watrin. Mr. Watrin, how will you use this guide? I think I'm curious to kind of accelerate climate action in Rwanda, and what are your ministry's top priorities in the climate related priorities?
Thank you, Minister Jay. Thank you, ministers, for your very inspiring speeches. So today we're discussing the very important coalition's guide, which covers the case for climate leadership by ministries of finance. It provides a framework for climate action. It's shaped by nearly 30 ministries of finance and more than 100 experts. And as an Helsinki Principle #2 achievement, led by Finland and Rwanda, I would like to commend first the excellent work of my colleague, Monsieur Pekka Moren, who just spoke right before from Finland, the Ministry of Finance of Finland. That's as well an interesting and successful example of peer-to-peer collaboration. And we know, Minister Jay, that this is key actually to the success, collaboration. It's one of the 3 core capabilities that are required. What I will share with you today is the experience of Rwanda, or even more broadly, Africa. We know that African countries are disproportionately affected by climate impact. The total annual climate finance flows in Africa are only 30 billion, whereas we need 277 billion, like only 11% needed annually each year. I think that Lord Nick Stern described it well. In challenging conditions, our economies, the inner structure of our economies are further endangered by external shocks. And those external shocks are the external shocks of the new decade: pandemic, supply chain disruption, global inflation, higher interest rates. Around the world, the impacts of climate change are outpacing the ability of developing nations to respond. At the same time, the provision of climate finance is failing to meet agreed targets under the Paris Agreement. And that's a topic that will be discussed within the next few weeks, actually, in the Paris Summit. So to come back to the guides of the framework for climate action, it highlights a nexus between climate finance, strategic planning, and climate policies. The Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning of Rwanda approach is based on a tripartite coordination. First, the strategic planning. Rwanda, to combat climate change, dire effects, and thanks to its excellent governance, I would say, and leadership, has been championing the green agenda. How? Climate is mainstream in the national programs. I believe Lord Nick Stern was talking about the NDCs. Uruguay just talked about the sustainable linked bonds. In Rwanda, we have the high-level programs that are delivered at the high level. There's as well a unique and innovative programmatic approach to fight climate change in Rwanda that we have developed, and the programmatic approach can be defined as a set of interlinked projects unified by the same objective of delivering climate results at speed and scale. So it's really grouping the project financing to be able to have more flexibility to tackle climate change. The second part is climate finance mobilization. It's part of the mandate of the Ministry of Finance. We need to challenge the one-size-fits-all prescription in global climate finance. It's easy, I agree. It's easy for the one who proposes it, but it does not match the receiving country's needs, especially in their specificities. How can you apply the same framework between small islands, large debt distressed country, Rwanda? A new approach is urgently needed to streamline and fast-track the provision of climate finance, to move beyond the small-scale project to a long-term programmatic approach, leveraging existing and proven mechanisms. We need as well to start to integrate the green private sector investment in climate. Last but not least, the relevant fiscal policies. And that's an interesting point. My colleague, the Honorable Minister from Denmark, was talking about it. It's a work that Rwanda is doing it as well currently. Rwanda was the first country in Africa to access the IMF Resilience and Sustainability Trust. What's interesting about the Resilience and Sustainability Trust and innovative is that it's a climate policy-based financing tool shaped to build resilience to external shocks in economies and to ensure sustainable growth with, at the same time, targeted climate policy. We often hear the discussion between monetary policies and fiscal policies. So the RST is a reconciliation between the two. Under the agreement with the IMF, the RST program, for example, supports a sequence of reform measures. One, the strengthening and institutionalizing of the monitoring of climate-related spending feeding into decision-making processes. So it's a very long sentence, but that's climate budget tagging, for example. Integrating climate risk into fiscal policies. It's something that the UK is already doing and that Rwanda is planning to do. Improving the sensitivity of public investment management to climate-related issues. Enhancing climate-related risk management for financial framework and developing a green finance market. We know that the next big risk, for example, in the finance global system is the risk against climate change. And that leads to the last policies, strengthening disaster risk reduction management. So last but not least, I think that holistically speaking, Rwanda is really looking forward to continue collaborating with the countries of the Coalition of Finance Ministers. And I believe that this framework with the three capabilities and the three pillars that I described are needed to deliver on the global climate agenda. I would like to finish by thanking very specially Lord Nick Stern and the whole Grantham Research Institute. So you not only have Nick and Annika, but you have a whole team behind, the honorable ministers for the speeches today, and the country leads within the Coalition of Finance Ministers. Thank you, Mr. J.
Thank you so much. And I've been told that we're out of time for this panel. And so I'd really just like to thank the panelists once again for these really valuable contributions and discussion. It was terrific hearing all the actions that different countries are taking. It's really quite inspiring. And I also, just to pick up on one theme that Thierry just mentioned, I think it really also highlights the importance of peer-to-peer learning here, and that to really see change, hearing what each other is doing and picking up best practices is one of our best opportunities to continue to drive ambition in this area. I think we know that bold climate action can be instrumental in helping us achieve our core priorities also as finance ministries around macro stability or growth or responsible management of public finances. And so it's clear how important this work is to everything that we're doing. And I hope this guide can really help both all of us here today, but many ministries around the world identify critical next steps in this process. And with that, I will turn it back over to Raline.
Thank you very much, Jay. This is a really, really excellent panel, fantastic speakers. Thank you all so much. So we're turning to another very exciting panel with great speakers from the World Bank, from IMF, and from former Minister of Finance of Brazil. So we've heard now about very important policies, but this next panel is going to be more about the actions we can take, because the policies, they provide a framework, and action and implementation are necessary for the real change to occur. And we want to turn these ideas and these policies into tangible results, because action empowers the individuals, communities, ministries, and make a direct impact on people's life. And it's the catalyst for progress and the bridge between the policy and the reality. So on this note, it's my great privilege to introduce our first speaker on this great next panel, Pablo Saavedra, the Vice President of the FE Global Practice at the World Bank. So Pablo, welcome. What innovations is the World Bank considering to support ministries of finance to deliver on the agenda and opportunities for climate action laid out in the guide? And what existing programs do you have or will you be scaling up?
Thank you, Riley, and let me extend a warm welcome to all the ministers and partners at this gathering of the Coalition of Finance Ministers. We all know that the needs for financing the transition and the global challenges that we face are massive. There are all sorts of numbers out there. We also have calculated ours. We know that we need at least $2.5 trillion annually between 2023 and 2030. That's approximately 6% of GDP in emerging and developing economies. So the needs are massive, and the action needs to be significant. And we believe that in the context of a very limited fiscal space, there's still a number of levers that ministers of finance can exert to accelerate climate action. And some of them were discussed at the policy level in the earlier session. I'll try to get into the detail of some of those policies and how they can get into action, particularly relying on the guide that was put together that I find very, very useful. One of the actions, very concrete, that I think many ministers of finance are thinking these days is how to put this into the medium-term fiscal frameworks of their countries. I think at this point it's very critical to embed the different policies, whether they are the investment side, the incentives for low carbon technologies, and overall the transition that will take place in the context of the medium-term fiscal frameworks. I think that's a first step. But we have seen already very concrete actions across some countries, for example, on the green tagging of the budget. That gives very concrete incentives, that gives very concrete accountabilities, that promotes transparency in parliaments about how we're going to go and take action. And we have examples from several countries, including in Mexico, for example, where they did a green tagging of the budget. There are other examples as well. And it's a very important tool to show how much the public sector is doing in this area, and have the authorities accountable to the people that can see through their budget process what the government is doing with their resources. On the tax side, there are very concrete actions as well, whether it's on having a better system of taxes for taxing carbon emissions, and reducing, obviously, several subsidies. Today, G20 countries are spending around $600 billion in average annually on fossil fuel subsidies. And I think there's significant space to trim that and generate resources through that. But there's other ways in which countries can also, ministers of finance can also help. Another way to deal with the situations, particularly in countries that face significant shocks coming from weather-related events, is to create the next wave of fiscal rules, where countries can save over the cycle, and then they have the resources in a fund to be able to react in a way that is contracyclical when the shocks come, with resilience, and maybe a strong link between climate-related investments in that fiscal rule, and also a link between the fiscal rule and a fund that could be funded not only by the savings of these countries, but perhaps by support from external donors as well. So there are many ways in which, for example, fiscal rules can help in supporting a much more resilient fiscal sector, and through that smoothing the shocks that come from climate-related events. But as we know, this process of the transition will also involve social impacts, and thus it's very important to design social safety nets and overall automatic stabilizers on the expenditure side that can help countries face the shocks that will come. That's also within the Ministry of Finance. That's a very critical resilience tool that we all need to work together. And these are just some of the examples of what we have seen over the last months working with countries. The World Bank is a natural repository of experiences, and we are moving these experiences across different countries, promoting the experiences that some of our members are taking, and we'll continue to do that. Of course, as we do that, we realize that the policy and the specific actions are critical, but also the capabilities, as some of the earlier speakers mentioned. Capacity building in the Ministers of Finance to deal with all this new set of different policies is very critical. We are also working on that, and we just created a climate action program related strictly to building capacity on these areas that we will formally launch on the sidelines of the Paris Summit as well. So with that, let me stop here, Ralin.
Thank you so much, Pablo. That's really excellent to hear. We will turn to the next speaker, which is Diego Mesa Pujo, Senior Climate Economist at the International Monetary Fund and also former Energy Minister in Colombia. Diego, from your experience, which is very rich, how do you think ministries of finance can best work together with the rest of the government to drive climate action?
Thank you, Ralin, and good afternoon from Bucharest to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to be talking to the Coalition of Finance Minister for Climate Action, as representing the IMF. So I'll draw into my experience as Minister of Energy for a brief illustration of how the role of finance ministers is very important in driving climate action and building and exploiting some of the opportunities that are covered in the guide. So my experience is that finance ministers are absolutely critical in driving the policy agenda for the whole government. During my tenure in Colombia, we achieved significant milestones in terms of expanding viable renewable energy, clean investment, energy storage, new technologies such as low emission and zero emission hydrogen and electric mobility. For example, we're able to design and successfully award the first competitive auctions for clean energy in Colombia, which turned out to be also the first double-sided auction for clean energy in the world. And this allowed the country to move from having less than 0.1% of renewable energy in its power mix to about 10% in 5 years. Similarly, during this time, through different policies, we're able to become the country leading in Latin America in sales of electric vehicles, and all this contributing to the climate mitigation policies that we have. A big part of this success was due to working in collaboration between the Ministry of Energy and the Ministry of Finance, as we work together, for example, to design investment-based fiscal incentives for this type of technologies, which provide a very conducive environment for investors into clean energy and electric mobility. We've also developed some sectoral policies, that complemented many of the policies that were led by the Minister of Finance. I'm just going to illustrate a few just to show that this was a holistic approach. So, for example, the Minister of Finance was also one of the leading members of the climate cabinet that we established by law. And they were responsible, obviously, for carbon taxes, something that has been discussed already by some of our colleagues here in the panel. They've also were responsible, with the collaboration of other ministries, for publishing the green taxonomy, which was very helpful to channel green investment into different sectors, and obviously responsible for the issuance of the first green bonds. Our colleague from Uruguay also talked about the experience in Uruguay in that front. They also helped the Environment Ministry to launch the payment for environmental services, which also very successful policy in Colombia, and also accompany the promulgation of the first climate action law. So this is just to say and summarize that the role of the Ministry of Finance is critical. They have to play a leadership role. They should be able to drive the policy agenda on climate action forward throughout the government. And if you allow me one more minute, Ralin, I just wanted to expand very briefly on the Resilience and Sustainability Trust, which our colleague Thierry touched on in the previous panel, which is this new facility that has been put out by the IMF to support low-income and middle-income vulnerable countries to address longer-term challenges such as the macroeconomic effects of climate change. So we're very happy to offer this new lending facility, which will address longer term issues that are not addressed by other traditional lending facilities within the fund. And now we're very happy to say that since we launched this in October 2022, 7 programs have been approved by the board, and 3 more have reached staff level agreements. And we're working very closely into reform measures on mitigation, on adaptation, on enabling institutions to make sure that ministers of finance play a catalytic role and have the support from the fund to reform measures that can drive climate action going forward. So I'll stop there just not to go over time, and I'm very happy to be here again, Rolene.
Thank you so much, Diego. Great examples. And then we turn to the last speaker on this great panel. And it's my great honor to introduce Joaquim Levy, who is the former Minister of Finance of Brazil, in addition to a very impressive array of credentials and titles that have earned him great esteem. Too many to all name here. Joaquim, based on your experience as a former Minister of Finance, what do ministries of finance need to move from high-level commitments to ambitious climate action?
Okay, well, first let me congratulate the organizers of this seminar, as well as all the ministries that have been involved in this effort. I remember the beginning of that back in 2018 in Bali. It's wonderful to see how much has been done since then. Look, every country, of course, is unique, but we can use the experience of each other, not only the good ones, but also the disappointing ones. And as was mentioned before, I think that ministers of finance have a fundamental role in making clear for other parts of the government, as well as for society, that addressing climate is fundamental for the long term sustainability of the economy. And very often, if you do it the right way, also to increase the efficiency of the economy, making things less expensive. So this role in terms of macro as well as micro reforms and initiatives is fundamental, and it can go, for instance, in addressing the electricity sector, ensuring that the distribution companies are well run, so that you can attract private capital, reduce the risk, as well as, of course, running the fiscal policies in a way that the country can be more attractive to capital, which is fundamental to finance the transformation that we need in the coming years. Let me talk a little bit about the experience of Brazil. There are a lot of things that have been built and are being building based on things that have been initiated some time ago, a decade ago. I tried to use the 6 box that Nick presented before and see a little bit how the finance minister is playing along these pillars. First, in terms of economic strategy, there is a fundamental role in terms of showing what I mentioned, that you can use your relative advantage, your comparative advantages in going, for instance, to a net zero strategy. In the case of Brazil, all the natural resources, but also some of the market structures and how you can strengthen these market structures. For instance, in our case, a single electricity market, which is very much based on private players and things like this. Of course, fiscal policies are very important, from carbon tax, taxing fuels adequately, and also ensuring the necessary resources to activities that are linked to climate. In the case of Brazil, for instance, ensuring that we provide enough money to fight deforestation, to protect the forest through the ministries. In the case of financing, it's also very important. It was mentioned by Uruguay and Colombia, the question of climate-linked bonds, green bonds. This is what you're moving towards. It required a few changes in the way Treasury approach that, but also establishing carbon markets. And we are finalizing the taxonomy, also the green taxonomy, which will guide the private sector. The financial sector in Brazil is quite large. So to enable it to channel resources to green activities like taxonomy can be very important. And also having the right tools to stimulate and finance low carbon agriculture. Of course, Brazil is a very large agricultural country, and promoting low carbon agriculture is very important. But in the soft area, also, I think there is a role that, for instance, right now, the finance ministry is having a role in preparing for the G20, which will be in Brazil next year, and as well as supporting the 2025 COP, which will be in Amazon, and also working with international financial institutions being present. We will be in Paris next week. I think this is very important to also make the needs and the voice of especially the South heard, so that you can have a good international architecture that really helps, like Secretary Allen mentioned, this transition and collaboration. As an organizing agent across the different ministries, that's a role that the finance minister has always to play. In the case of Brazil, it is playing. It has to be played with leadership, but also humility, because we have to hear all the partners so that you can get a really horizontal and encompassing strategy. I would say also in other human capabilities, I think the collaboration with ministries, for instance, how to prepare application for loans and support, international support for specific activities. In most countries, this is a role that the finance minister, sometimes the planning minister, have to play, and you have to give guidance on what to consider when you go after international finance. We also, like I mentioned before, have to finance things in case of Brazil, for instance, research in terms of minerals and other things that will be the base for the future economy. So I think that the way the guide presented these ways for the finance minister to really support all the line ministries and help the government, the president or the prime minister in expressing the commitment of the country with climate policies. It's something that in Brazil we are now making a lot of progress, and it's really very encouraging that all the examples that are given in the guide, because I think this sharing of experiences is the most valuable, one of the most valuable things of this coalition. And I'm very glad that in Brazil we are being able to operate in this way, and with a lot of collaboration across the ministries and agencies. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And yes, we look forward a lot to working with Brazil more closely in the coming time and looking at the big events coming up. So we have only a few minutes left. I want to thank these fantastic panelists so much for your contributions, and turn it to Nick to see if we can take a few more questions from the audience. Over to you, Nick. Thank you all.
Great. Thank you, Raleen, and thank you all. We're gonna run about 5 minutes over. We do want to have some time for audience Q&A. So the first question that has come up is for Azucena Abeleche, the Minister. One of our audience has asked, what has been the biggest administrative or institutional capacity challenge that you faced in building your capabilities within the Ministry of Finance to drive climate action? Minister, just 1 minute from you, please. Minister, you're on mute.
Thank you. So the main challenge has been to build capabilities in our ministry. We are a economist. We, as Secretary Yellen said at the beginning, we have to work together with other areas. So we have set a new unit, environmental unit, which coordinates with the tax area, with the fiscal area, with the trade area, with the different areas within the ministry. And each of the different areas are mandated to analyze how the work can have an impact in terms of environmental policy. So it's a complete different set of mind for every unit in the ministry, and the coordination of these different units is done by a new area, environmental area.
Great, thank you. In the interest of time, I'm going to move to another question. So Amanda Janu from the Wellbeing Economy Alliance has asked all speakers, and perhaps I'd ask the Minister from Denmark to lead on this. What opportunities and challenges do you see for ministries of finance and governments to move beyond GDP to develop new indicators of progress centered on social and ecological well-being? Minister Morton.
Yes, thank you very much. As I said in my speech, I think the main point is to have a clear strategy, of course, but also clear political goals, and then also a willingness to create a flexible organization that both can work with clear but also changing political goals and a strong coordination in trying to implement the political goals into reality. So I think our experience is actually rather good. We have also moved our environmental policy, and as I said, with different pretty ambitious political agreements into a new phase now, where the Minister of Finance is a central player in implementing the political agreement right now. So I actually think the experiences they are really good, and a close so to say on-hand coordination when it comes to implementation of the very ambitious political agreements that we have adopted here in Denmark is necessary, and it place the Minister of Finance in a central position. So I think that it's a key factor that we have Minister of Finance is placed central in, especially when it comes to implementation of the political agreements, and because when we are talking implementation, coordination between different ministries and different authorities is crucial.
Thank you, Minister. Would any other speakers like to address the question related to beyond GDP? Otherwise, we'll move on to the next question.
Fine, Nick, if I could come in very quickly. I do think for a long time now, we have been moving along. Looking back, when I was chief economist of the World Bank from 2000, 2003, and the Millennium Development Goals were published, then the World Bank's development statistics were organized around reporting on the Millennium Development Goals, and now a lot of those statistics are organized around reporting on the Sustainable Development Goals. So those are surely very clear statements of objectives and their measurement moving beyond MDBs. OECD has published for a while now, or used to publish their thing on How's Life, which was measuring well-being. Joe Stiglitz chaired a commission back in 2008-9 on the request of the French presidency, setting out the importance of using, as it were, a dashboard and not just simply one number. So I do hope that in setting world objectives and country reporting, there has been a movement beyond GDP, and that movement has been there for really quite a long time. Rightly so, of course.
Great, thank you very much, Nick. We're going to turn to another question. This is the most popular question, and I'm sure one of the most challenging to answer. So we have a question: the oil and gas sector has witnessed record profits this year, even as we get closer to surpassing our carbon budget for 1.5, much sooner than expected. Why aren't all ministries of finance pursuing extraordinary taxes on the oil and gas sector? So this question has been addressed to all of you. Would anyone like to come in here and just ask one or two of you to speak for a minute or so?
Well, I just mentioned very briefly in Brazil, of course, in the case of Brazil, we are a producer of oil. So actually, we do use the resources from oil production to a number of activities, including the protection of the environment. And the discussion is how much you can increase the fuel taxes, and this has now been pursued, and some of the taxes that had been lowered at the peak of international prices, you reflect international price in the domestic prices, don't have subsidies, but you had reduced taxes. We have brought back the taxes, and I think we're going to pursue ever more aggressive policy in terms of fuel taxes, which is a very direct way of price carbon.
Thank you, Joachim. Anyone else like to come in? Diego, and then
yes.
Minister Abeleche, then we'll turn to the final question. Diego.
Thank you, Nick. So very briefly, I think it's a great question. And first, I think from a fiscal policy point of view, I think this reiterates the importance that producer countries have progressive fiscal regimes. What do we mean by progressive? That we have fiscal regimes in place that make sure that when prices go up or profitability of projects go up, the state is able to capture a bigger government revenue, a bigger share of the pie, if you wish. However, I think we need to think about how to address this issue, because the reality is that this is a demand-driven issue. So there's more demand for oil and gas, and this demand usually is coming from advanced economies. While we have a number of countries like Colombia, like Brazil, that still need to address a lot of social issues, and they rely significantly on revenues from oil and gas, even though a lot of the oil and gas that is produced in these countries is not burned within their territory, but is exported as a raw material. So just to conclude, I think there are a number of other policy options. Obviously, carbon pricing, which we discussed at length here, is very important. Thinking on the upstream, we could also think about, for example, methane fees to make sure that if production continues to take place, is done in a very efficient way from an environmental point of view, and that we don't have venting of methane or natural gas, we don't have flaring, we don't have fugitive emissions, and then we also address this on the demand side.
Thank you, Diego. Minister Abeleche, 1 minute.
Thank you. So first of all, we have to bear in mind that this is about a gradual and just transition, where we also have to bear in mind to consider the impact in terms of growth and in terms of employment, that actually at the end of the day is what matters to economic policymakers. In that regard, we have to, Uruguay is moving from fossil fuel to green energy. And we have implemented a tax on the emission of carbon dioxide from gasoline that is equivalent today. I don't know the latest figure, but it's around 120 or maybe more around $150 per ton of carbon emission. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Minister Abeleche, and congratulations, Uruguay close to 100% renewable energy, one of the only countries in the world. Very fierce ambition, so congratulations. Look, we're out of time, we're already 5 minutes over. I did just want to recognise to the audience that there's many questions we've not been able to address today. We could have used another few hours for such a rich discussion, but we do need to conclude. I'm going to ask Rallian Beckers to wrap us up. Rallian, over to you.
Thank you so much, Nick, and thank you, everyone. This was such a rich discussion indeed. And we're now coming to a close of this very remarkable event hosted by the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action. And so I am representing the Netherlands Ministry of Finance, because we have joined as a new co-chair as of this year, as of April. I want to first sincerely thank everybody involved in this event, the audience. It's been a great attendance, also the fantastic speakers, LSE, GRI with Lord Stern, but also Annika and Nick and the team, and the Coalition Secretariat, and the co-lead countries as well, Rwanda and Finland. It was really a very, very interesting conversation. So throughout this event, we have witnessed insightful discussions and exchanges on innovative solutions that have the potential to reshape our economies and redefine our approach to the transition to a low carbon economy. And the power of this coalition is really in having this space to learn from each other and then act on it in our own countries. And the topics of today have underscored the interconnected nature of our economies and the need for coordinated action. It is clear that we need to mobilize resources, foster international cooperation, and implement forward-thinking policies that address the urgent challenges facing our global economic system. And it is in this light that the Coalition of Finance Ministers has emerged as a beacon for positive change. And the Netherlands is very proud to play a humble role in helping lead the way. So at the same time, to conclude, we're also cognitive that complacency is not an option and inaction is our greatest threat. So the discussions held and solutions proposed must now translate into tangible actions on the ground. It is crucial for us to follow through in the policy roadmap and capacity leveraging plan laid out today. And of course, while the path may be challenging, it is top priority for the Dutch and Indonesian co-chairs to transition the coalition from only thought leadership or mostly thought leadership to also driving collaborative action and achieving the impact that our world needs. So stay tuned, because in the coming years, as the new co-chairs, our aspiration is to engage closely with members and partners, working together to enact the transformative change needed to put our economies on a sustainable and socially just pathway. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Raline. A huge thank you to all of you. Huge thank you to all of our speakers for joining us today. It's been a very rich discussion, and really want to just emphasize that we must go from guide to action. And this is very much will be dependent on all of your leadership. Congratulations to all of you, and thank you to all of you who've been involved in making this event a success. I very much look forward to continuing in the future. And we will now end the event for today. Thank you all.